In the early 20th century, mankind found a new battlefield, the sky. During World War I, fragile biplanes of wood and fabric fought primitive duels, and from that chaos, the fighter ace was born. A lone warrior, a duelist in the clouds, a figure of skill and deadly grace. By 1939, as the world teetered on the brink of war, aviation had transformed. Aircraft were now sleek, all-metal machines armed with machine guns and cannons. The sky was no longer an afterthought. It was a decisive weapon. When World War II erupted, the cockpit became both armor and coffin. Each flight was a gamble with death, and only a few would rise to become legends. In the summer of 1940, Hitler's war machine had conquered Western Europe. Only Britain stood defiant. To invade, the Luftwaffe had to destroy the Royal Air Force. Thus began the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. The Luftwaffe was confident. Its Messerschmitt Bf-19s were among the best in the world. Facing them were the Roves Hawker Hurricanes and the elegant Supermarine Spitfires, flown by men with everything to lose. Among them was squadron leader Douglas Bader, having lost both legs in a pre-war crash, returned to combat using metal prosthetics. His defiance became a symbol of the Rov's spirit. "Don't listen to anyone who tells you you can't do this," he told his men. "We're not here to survive. We're here to win." The Luftwaffe's top ace was Adolf Galland, a charismatic leader who respected his enemies. The RAF pilots fought magnificently, he later admitted. The skies over southern England became an inferno. The roar of Merlin engines, the rattle of machine guns, and the smoke of burning planes filled the summer air. But it wasn't just bravery that saved Britain. It was technology. Radar towers gave early warning, and ground controllers guided fighters to intercept, saving precious fuel and lives. By late October, Hitler postponed the invasion. The Luftwaffe had lost over 1,700 aircraft. For the first time, Nazi Germany had been stopped. As Winston Churchill famously said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." While the Battle of Britain was a triumph of defense, the Eastern Front was a crucible of attrition. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe achieved overwhelming success at first, destroying thousands of obsolete Soviet planes. But as the brutal Russian winter set in, the nature of the air war changed. It was here that a quiet young pilot named Erich Hartmann began his career. Nicknamed Booby, or the Boy, Hartmann developed a deadly ambush tactic. He would dive silently on the last aircraft in a formation, fire only when certain of a kill, and then break away. This discipline made him the most successful fighter pilot in history, with 352 confirmed victories. "I didn't fight men," he said later. "I fought machines." Other German aces like Gerhard Barkhorn and Gunther Rauel also achieved staggering kill counts. But the Soviet Union produced its own heroes. Ivan Kozhedub, flying the robust Slovakian La-7, became the top Allied ace of the war with 62 kills. His comrade, Alexander Pokrishkin, was a brilliant tactician who developed new doctrines that dramatically improved Soviet survival rates. By 1943, with new aircraft and better training, the Red Air Force began to challenge German dominance. The skies over Kursk saw thousands of fighters clash in a storm of steel. As Germany's fuel shortages worsened, its aerial supremacy waned. But not before the Eastern Front had forged the greatest number of aces in history. Meanwhile, a different war raged across the endless blue of the Pacific. It began with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the skill of the Japanese pilots. Flying the nimble Mitsubishi A6M0 stunned the world. The Zero could outturn almost any opponent. Japan's greatest ace was Saburō Sakai, a man who embodied the Bushido spirit. He claimed 64 victories and in one legendary feat flew his damaged Zero over 1,000 kilometers back to base after being shot in the head, blinded in one eye. But Japan's elite training program couldn't replace its losses. As experienced pilots fell, they were gone forever. The U.S. Navy adapted, developing teamwork tactics like the Thatch Weave. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was the turning point, where Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers and hundreds of its best aviators. Soon, new American planes arrived. The rugged Grumman F-6F Hellcat was nicknamed the Ace Maker. One of its pilots, David McCampbell, became the U.S. Navy's top ace. Once shooting down 9 enemy planes in a single mission, over the jungles of New Guinea, another legend rose. Major Richard Bong, of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Flying the P-38 Lightning, he scored 40 kills, becoming America's highest-scoring ace. "I don't shoot for medals," he said quietly. "I shoot so my friends don't get shot." By late 1944, Japan's air arm was collapsing, leading to the desperate kamikaze attacks. The war in the Pacific ended with Japan's skies nearly empty, its once invincible Zero now a relic. Back in Europe, the Allies launched a massive strategic bombing campaign against Germany. By 1943, hundreds of B-17s and B-24s flew into German airspace daily, escorted by long-range fighters. The Luftwaffe fought desperately to stop them. Their Bf-19s and FW-190s were outmatched by new Allied planes, especially the P-51 Mustang. With its powerful Merlin engine, the Mustang could fly all the way to Berlin and back, dominating the high-altitude dogfights. Pilots like Captain Bud Anderson, flying as P-51 Old Crow, became symbols of this new era. In his words, flying the Mustang was like being part of the airplane. You didn't ride it to war it. Another ace, Chuck Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, shot down 5 enemy aircraft in a single day. The Luftwaffe's losses were catastrophic. In a last-ditch effort, Germany unveiled a revolutionary weapon, the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262. The Me-262 was a phantom, far faster than any Allied propeller plane. In the hands of veterans like Adolf Galland, it could wreak havoc on bomber formations. But it was too little too late. Its engines were fragile, its numbers few. The jet age had dawned, but the war was already lost for Germany. As the conflict drew to a close in May 1945, the skies fell silent. The Knights of the Sky, men who had dueled in the clouds from Britain to Russia to the Pacific, returned to a world forever changed. Their stories of courage, skill, and sacrifice remind us of a time when the fate of nations rested in the hands of a few brave pilots. The war was over. The skies once filled with the roar of engines fell silent. Across Europe and the Pacific, the smoke cleared to reveal a world scarred and forever changed. For the fighter aces, peace brought a strange emptiness. They had lived on the razor's edge of life and death, but now, in a world at peace, their extraordinary skills were no longer needed. The total cost of the air war was staggering. Over 100,000 fighter pilots died, most of them just boys in their 20s. The glory of the ace was built on a mountain of sacrifice. For every famous name like Hartmann or Bong, thousands perished in anonymity, their names lost to the wind. Yet their courage was just as real. They fought for mere seconds of survival in machines that could burn, spin, and shatter at the slightest touch. The transition from war to peace was a new kind of battle. Erich Hartmann, Germany's blonde knight, surrendered to the Americans, only to be handed over to the Soviets. Branded a war criminal, he was sentenced to 25 years in a labor camp. For a decade, he endured starvation and interrogation. "I survived by remembering the sky," he later wrote. "In my mind, I flew every day." Released in 1955, he joined the new West German Air Force, but he was haunted by the past. He was the most successful fighter pilot in history, with 352 kills, but he was never proud of it. "Every kill was a tragedy," he said. It meant another man would never go home. Adolf Galland, the former commander of Germany's fighter forces, became an aviation consultant. Respected by his former enemies, he once said of them, they were brave men. We all fought the same war, just under different flags. Across the Atlantic, America's top ace, Richard Bong, was mourned as a national hero. He died in a jet accident on the very day of the Hiroshima bombing, a symbolic end to one era and the birth of another. His wife Marjorie received the telegram informing her of his death as the world celebrated victory. America's second highest ace, Thomas Maguire, also perished, killed while trying to save a fellow pilot. Their stories remind us that even the best could fall to a single mistake or a burst of bad luck. In the Pacific, Japan's samurai of the sky, Saburō Sakai, returned to a defeated nation. He dedicated his life to peace and reconciliation between Japan and the United States. Speaking of his former enemies, he said, "The Americans were strong, honorable warriors. In the sky, there was no hatred, only respect. The Soviet Union's greatest aces, Ivan Kozhedub and Alexander Pokrishkin, returned as national heroes. Kozhedub became an air marshal, while Pokrishkin championed modern air tactics, often clashing with rigid commanders. But for many aces, fame didn't bring peace. Survivors' guilt was a heavy burden. After years of constant danger and adrenaline, civilian life felt hollow and quiet. Behind every ace was a squadron of men who never became legends. The life expectancy of a new pilot on the front lines was often measured in weeks. During the Battle of Britain, an RAF pilot's average survival time was just 4 weeks. On the brutal Eastern Front, it was often even less. Pilots flew until exhaustion broke them. Sleep deprivation, frostbite, and malnutrition were as deadly as enemy bullets. And for those who survived, the wounds were often invisible. They woke up screaming from nightmares of falling, their comrades forever frozen in time as smiling 20-year-olds in black and white photos. One American veteran wrote, "We weren't heroes. We were boys who grew up too fast. We lived on luck and instinct, and somehow luck ran out for most of us." By 1945, the Luftwaffe had lost over 70% of its pre-war pilots. Japan's losses were even more catastrophic. Yet even in this sea of death, stories of humanity emerged. There were recorded moments of mutual respect. Pilots from opposing sides saluting each other in midair or dropping life rafts for downed enemies. One of the most famous examples happened over France in 1943. German ace Franz Stigler was chasing a badly damaged B-17 bomber. Seeing the American crew was wounded and the plane was helpless, Stigler refused to shoot. Instead, he escorted the crippled bomber to safety, saluted its pilot, and turned back. Decades later, the two men, Stigler and Charlie Brown, met and became lifelong friends. When asked why he spared his enemy, Stigler simply said, "You don't shoot a man in a parachute, and that plane was a parachute." These stories remind us that even in war's darkest hours, humanity can endure. The end of World War II didn't end air combat, it transformed it. The jet engine had arrived. Within a few years, aircraft like the MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre were dueling in the skies over Korea. Dogfighting would continue, but it would never again have the same brutal intimacy. Missiles and radar changed everything. The age of the lone ace scanning the horizon for his prey was over. Yet many World War II veterans shaped this new era. Chuck Yeager, a Mustang ace, became the first person to break the sound barrier. Ivan Kozhedub oversaw Soviet jet development. Adolf Galland advised NATO. Their experience bridged to worlds, from canvas wings to supersonic flight. The tactics they perfected, energy management, situational awareness, discipline are still the foundation of modern aerial combat. Every fighter pilot today, whether in an F-16 or an F-35, learns from the lessons written in the skies by the men who flew Spitfires and Messerschmitts. As the decades passed, the world began to look at the aces differently. During the war, they were propaganda heroes. In peacetime, the human cost became clearer. Was it right to celebrate a man for his number of kills? Or did the ace represent something deeper, the courage of an individual against impossible odds? The aces themselves were divided. Erich Hartmann insisted he was just a soldier doing his duty. Saburō Sakai became an advocate for peace. Chuck Yeager warned against the dangers of pride, saying, "The sky doesn't forgive arrogance." Perhaps the truth is that they were not mythic figures, but human beings gifted, driven, and trapped in a world gone mad. They fought not for glory, but for survival. Their stories endure not because of their kill counts, but because they show us what humanity is capable of, for better and for worse, under the most extreme pressure imaginable. When the guns finally fell silent and the contrails faded from the sky, the world entered an uneasy peace. But the legends of the fighter aces refused to vanish. They lingered in books, in black and white film reels, and in the memories of those who had seen them streak across the heavens like falling stars. The ace wasn't just a soldier. It was a symbol of mastering fear, of the individual's defiance against the machinery of total war. In an age when nations fought with tanks and bombs, The lone pilot still represented something deeply human: skill, courage, and control in the face of chaos. The Second World War transformed aviation forever. When it began in 1939, fighters were powered by piston engines, armed with machine guns, and guided by sight alone. By 1945, the jet had arrived. Radar was in its infancy, and air combat had become a science. The tactics developed by the aces shaped every generation of fighter doctrine that followed. Boom and zoom tactics, where you dive from a high altitude to strike and then climb away, originated with German and American pilots like Erich Hartmann and Chuck Yeager. Deflection shooting, perfected by American P-38 and P-51 pilots, became the foundation of modern gunnery. And wingman coordination, which was refined during the Battle of Britain and in the Pacific, evolved into the element and flight formations that air forces still use today. Many of the surviving aces became instructors, ensuring their hard-won lessons wouldn't die with them. Hartmann trained NATO pilots in the 1950s, insisting on simplicity and discipline. He famously said, "You fight with your head first, not your trigger." Ivan Kozhedub, the top Allied ace, shaped the doctrine of the Soviet air defense forces, teaching that technology must serve the pilot, never replace him. The engineers who studied their combat reports went on to design the jets that would rule the Cold War. The F-86 Sabre, the MiG-15, the Mirage 3. When those aircraft met over Korea and Vietnam, the ghosts of 1940 and 1944 seemed to return. The machines were new, but it was the same eternal duel of sight, nerve, and speed. In the decades after the war, the figure of the ace took on mythic proportions. Newspapers, novels, and later films turned them into icons. Britain immortalized the few of the Battle of Britain pilots like Bader, Mallon, and Johnson as the guardians of liberty. Germany, though scarred by defeat, celebrated its aviators for their professionalism rather than their ideology. Japan revered Saburō Sakai as a national treasure, a man who turned from a warrior into a pacifist. And the United States produced heroes whose names filled comic books and recruiting posters: Bong, Maguire, and McCampbell. Hollywood soon followed. Films like Battle of Britain, Tora, and the bridges at Tokari brought aerial combat to the big screen, their roaring engines echoing through cinemas worldwide. In the 1980s, Top Gun reignited the public's fascination with the fighter pilot, though the sleek jets and mirrored sunglasses couldn't hide their lineage from those canvas-clad youths of 1940. Yet behind every glorified image, the veterans reminded the public of what the camera could not capture: the fear, the exhaustion, and the loss. "People see the dogfight," said Chuck Yeager, "but they never see the empty chairs in the briefing room the next morning." Time, the final arbiter, eventually transformed enemies into friends. In 1954, former Royal Air Force and Luftwaffe pilots met for the first time at a small airfield in England. They drank together, traded stories, and discovered that their memories were strikingly similar: the smell of fuel, the tremor in their hands before combat, the profound relief of landing alive. In later years, Saburō Sakai visited American bases, where he was greeted with honor by the very men who had once tried to kill him. When asked why he came, he answered, "To thank them, because they taught me respect." Perhaps the most moving reunion occurred between Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown. Decades after that incredible day in 1943, when Stigler had spared Brown's crippled B-17, they embraced like long-lost brothers. "We're not enemies," Stigler said, with tears in his eyes. "We're brothers of the same sky." These stories became powerful symbols of reconciliation, proof that even in the midst of war's cruelty, decency could survive. The Ace's legend endures because it reflects the paradox of modern war. He is both a hero and a killer, a poet and an executioner. He fights in a machine built for death, yet his mastery of it feels like a form of art. Historians have called them technological knights, men who carried a code of chivalry into an age of total destruction. They lived by simple rules: never attack a defenseless foe, never abandon your comrade, never surrender without a fight. Not all of them kept those rules, but enough did to give the myth its enduring light. In truth, the ace was not superhuman. He was a man who learned to manage fear, to function while the world burned around him. As one veteran put it, courage is doing your job when your hands won't stop shaking. Their machines were extensions of their will. The Spitfire was graceful yet deadly, a dancer on the wind. The Bf-109 was sharp and unforgiving, a duelist's blade. The P-51 Mustang was powerful and loyal, the long-range companion of bombers over the Reich, and the Zero was elegant and fragile, a symbol of both brilliance and sacrifice. Each plane carried the philosophy of its nation and the soul of the men who flew it. By the dawn of the 21st century, the last of the World War II aces were old men. Their bodies were frail, but their eyes still shone brightly when they spoke of the sky. Would gather at air shows, their metals glinting in the sun, surrounded by the thunder of restored warbirds machines that once decided the fate of nations, now flown simply for remembrance. When asked what they felt hearing those engines again, most smiled sadly. "It sounds like ghosts," said Bud Anderson, one of the few remaining Mustang pilots. Beautiful ghosts? Their legacy lives on, not just in museums, but in the very DNA of modern aviation. In every cockpit display, every formation drill, every lesson on situational awareness. The air forces of today still teach the ethics born in that crucible: discipline, honor, and respect for the enemy. And above all, humility before the sky. To study the fighter aces is to study human nature under extreme pressure. They reveal what happens when instinct, technology, and mortality collide. The aces' victories were counted in numbers: 5 kills for the title, 44 fame, 304 legend, but numbers can never measure the true cost. Each mark painted on a fuselage represented a story cut short, a pilot lost to history. In every nation, the best pilots rarely survived the war. Those who did carried the weight of that memory. Many refused to speak of it for decades. They had simply seen too much. Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring ace of all time, summed it up best. "We were not heroes. We were survivors." The heroes were the ones who never came back. Today, satellites orbit where Mustangs once flew. Drones patrol battlefields with no human inside. Yet whenever a pilot takes the controls of a modern fighter, an F-22, a Su-57, a Rafale, the echoes of those earlier generations are still there. The headset crackles with the same tension. The horizon curves the same way. And in those moments before takeoff, every aviator feels the same mixture of fear and awe that their grandfathers felt, climbing into their Spitfires or Zeros. Because flight, even in war, has always been about more than just survival. It is the human dream of freedom, raised to its most perilous height. The aces of the Second World War were born into the deadliest conflict in history, yet they turned its cruelty into something sublime, a dance of skill, courage, and tragedy. They proved that even amid destruction, beauty could exist, the beauty of mastery, of purpose, of a man at one with his machine. They rose before dawn, when the world was quiet and the clouds were pink with sunrise. They strapped themselves into engines that shook the earth, knowing each flight might be their last. They fought over seas, over cities, over fields that would one day grow silent again. And when they fell, they joined the sky they loved so much. They were the knights of the modern age, young, flawed, and brave. They did not seek immortality, yet history gave it to them. Their names: Bader, Galland, Hartmann, Kozhedub, Sakai, Bong, McCampbell still whisper through the winds of memory. They remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. That mastery of the skies begins with mastery of oneself. And though the age of the dogfight has passed, the spirit of the ace endures, wherever humans dare to rise beyond the limits of the earth and touch the infinite blue. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the world of the World War II fighter aces. If you enjoyed this series, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history. We'll see you next time.